1,000 campuses across this nation. And one of the things that I think is so important for the high schoolers today is to be aware of the stories that have taken place in the past so that we can stand strong and say the anti-Semitism that caused the Holocaust will never happen again in our lifetime. I want to give a special shout out to the high schoolers across this nation who are watching with their families, and a special shout out to Deb Campbell and the high schoolers at Living Word Christian Center, and Cindy Cox and her high schoolers from her homeschool network in Oklahoma, as well as our 2020 Bonhoeffer Fellowship from CUFI on campus. Right now, we're gearing up for our CUFI DC Summit, which takes place June 28th and 29th. Everyone on this webinar is invited, if you are a student, to attend the CUFI Virtual Summit free of charge. This will include in-depth sessions by the CUFI on campus team on Israel and the college campus issues in focus. We'll look at the top 10 lies that you see and experience on campuses across the nation. The lies are so outrageous when it comes to Israel and the Jewish people, and they keep coming. Right now, with everything going on with COVID, you can see all over the internet that the anti-Semites are not taking a break, even during quarantine, on demonizing Israel and the Jewish people. Right now, we have the anti-Semitic movement blaming Israel for coronavirus. We have college campuses that are demonizing their Jewish student body. So what we're looking for is a young generation of Christians who understand that we support Israel and the Jewish people because of God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When you hear from Irving in just a moment, understand that this was just a few years ago when you look at the scope of human history. This can happen again so easily. And what we're seeing across the nation with the anti-Semitism that is erupting across Europe, the synagogue attack that happened in our own nation, on our own soil, this is very real. It's very imminent that we make sure this never happens again. So with CUFI on campus, we are so adamant that our young people, the future leaders of this country, understand what's going on. And we're working with Irving right now. He's having a slight technical difficulty in getting his camera going. So I want you to email us at cuficampus.org if you would like to hear more about one of our latest initiatives, which is a high school curriculum. We have produced 20 lectures on Israel and the history of that nation as concerns Christian. I don't know if we're ready to start. One thing I would like everyone to know is we're making space on this webinar to have Irving answer your questions. So there is a option at the top of your screen, depending on if you're watching from an iPad, an iPhone, or your laptop, it'll be in a different area. But you can submit Q&A, and Irving will be answering your questions at the end of his presentation when he shares his story. So if you have any questions at all for Irving, just submit those at the top, and we'll moderate the Q&A at the end. And you can have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have your questions answered by a Holocaust survivor. Irving is so special to us. He's spoken to thousands of CUFI campus students in his long relationship with CUFI. He is very much family, and he is very much beloved by us. And we are going to share his story as well at the virtual DC Summit. So just waiting to know when Irving will be ready to go. We may be able to try it out. So I just got the go ahead that we're going to see if this works now. So Irving, I will toss it to you.
Okay. Hello, Irving, can you hear us? go ahead and unmute.
Hello, can you unmute me?
Yep,
Can
you are
you
ready
hear
to
me?
go?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Good. Okay. Good morning. Sorry for the technology problems we always have. Good morning and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. What I would like to do is take you off your home today and on a journey in time and distance. The place we'll be speaking about mostly Europe, where Europe was, where I was at the same time. Let me begin by the time I was born, 1929, in a place called Czechoslovakia. Now, by this time, the country Czechoslovakia was 10 years old. It was a democracy, basically modeled on the American concept of equality, freedom, opportunity for all. This is what I'm born into. And I live in a small city of about 7,000 people, and 1/3 of the population was Jewish, 1/2 of the population Catholics, and we had some assorted Russian Orthodox and evangelical Christians, living in peace and harmony. By age 6, I begin school, in a public school, of course, like every other student in the whole city. And I actually liked school because school was something for me. And it was a new school, actually, the day I started, because the city decided to build a new school. At first, I thought it was because I started school. It was not so. It was because the old school was kind of falling apart and too small. And so I begin first day in school. I'm perfectly happy because they have a soccer team, and besides that, there's some new people I don't know. In particular, there was a beautiful girl in my class, probably the most beautiful I've ever seen in my whole life. And the objective was to see her every day, of course, as I did. And so I begin school. I'm perfectly happy there. My little girlfriend, after a while, becomes my friend, and I walk with her to school and back. I carry her books. She's Russian Orthodox. I'm Jewish Orthodox, but it does not matter what religion we are. I go to my synagogue, she goes to her church, but we're friends. We're little kids, doing wonderfully. And life is beautiful. I live in a house with my parents, my grandparents, my older brother. And it's very nice living with grandparents because grandparents are so much easier to handle and to manipulate than parents, as you all know. And so I'm living this wonderful life, perfectly happy, free, go where I want to go, do what I want to do, as long as I keep my grades up, like every other student in my day. But then things began to change. Why? Because the world began to change. Germany occupied part of Czechoslovakia in 1938, and by 1939, Germany and Slovakia decide that they don't want to have a country called Czechoslovakia. They just want to have a country called Slovakia. And they wanted to emulate whatever Germany was doing in 1935, namely the persecution of Jews. And so by 1939, things change very drastically. Total differences. Like one day in the summer of 1939, I try to go into the park, and I can't go in because I'm a Jew. Want to go to the beach. I can't go because I am a Jew. I'm not allowed to go in. Very soon I find out there are other restrictions. For instance, one day I hear that I can no longer wear my sheepskin jacket in the winter of 1939. Why? Because you're a Jew, and that's a luxury. And Jews are no longer allowed to have any luxuries. Jews can no longer own or wear anything made of fur. And that's why I have to take my sheepskin jacket and turn it into the police department because I'm a Jew. Not only that, no Jewish woman was allowed to keep any of her gold jewelry. And if she would, the police can come in, search the house, and if they found anything which was made of gold, they could even arrest her and fine her. And thus goes my life. The perfect freedom is no longer in existence. And then my bicycle is taken away because I'm a Jew. A radio is taken away because we are Jews. All this is taking place, the persecution. And then something awful happens to me. Awful from my perspective. And that was in September of 1940. I get up in the morning. I know where I'm going. It's the first, I'm going to school. I know my class. I know my teacher. I know the students I'm going with. But I arrive at the gate of the school, and the principal stands there, looks at me and says, "You can't go in." I said, "Well, why not?" "Because you're a Jew." Every Jewish student in the whole country was no longer allowed to go to class. All Jewish students were thrown out of class. Not only that, all Jewish teachers were fired. And so not only the students, but now the teachers, the economic oppression of Jews begins. Very soon, Jews could no longer practice law. If you're an attorney, you could no longer go to court. You could no longer do any work because you were a Jew. And then comes a rather severe blow to my family. My father had a business. He produced railroad ties. And Jews were no longer allowed to own a business. And so you can imagine this was the way my father earned money, by producing and shipping and selling railroad ties all over Europe. But by law, he could no longer own it. And so he asked one of his Christian friends to lend him his name and change the name of the company. And so what happens, rather than Roth and Company, now it had a new name called Melazik and Company, and some papers were signed, I suppose, and now it is no longer a Jewish business. And therefore, no one can walk in and take it away. Because my father's friend, Albert, allowed my father to change the name to his name, and everything was wonderful again, financially. But a few months go by, and Albert walks into my father's office one day and says to my father, "How is business, Joe?" My father says, "Great. I really appreciate what you're doing for me." He says, "Well, I know I'm doing a good, very good thing for you. And I thought I am entitled to much more than what you give me, a monthly stipend of a few thousand crowns. After all, I'm the owner. And therefore, from now on, all the money that the company makes is mine. Yes, I will still keep you as a manager, and I will actually pay you a salary. But remember, the business is mine." And so here is a person who helped my father. He rescued my father's business from someone walking in, a Christian coming in and taking it away. But eventually, he takes it away. So not only is the law, but people have changed, people have transformed. And as you know, September 1, 1939, World War II began. Germany occupied Poland, and they began to oppress the Polish Jews. Eventually, Germany takes over other countries, Belgium, Holland, eventually France, and every place they go, they oppress Jews. First, they have to wear a yellow star, then they can't go out at night, then you can go shopping only between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. And eventually the businesses are taken away, and Jewish people working for the government or in schools are all fired. Jewish students are thrown out. All this is going on. But we're still living at home with the difficulties. And then comes 1941. in June of 1941, Germany attacks the Soviet Union. Soviet Union is totally unprepared for this. Because after all, they had an agreement with Germany that Germany will not attack the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union will not attack Germany. They had a pact, a written document. But at the end of June of 1941, Germany, joined by Hungary and eventually by Slovakia, the country I live in, against the Soviet Union. And deep into the Soviet Union goes the German army. Soviet Union was totally unprepared. Because after all, they felt secure because they had an agreement. But unfortunately, Germany and its allies didn't keep to these agreements. And of course, you would think that they brought the same hatred of the Jew, the same anti-Semitism, the same anti-Jewish laws to the Soviet Union against the Jews. They didn't do that. They did something much more severe. As they occupied cities and towns and villages in the Soviet Union, they gathered the Jews, marched them out into the forest, into a field or into a ravine, when they prepared ditches and machine gunned the Jews. Thus began, in the summer of 1942, mass murder of the Jews. It was part of the plan. Part of the plan was to make Germany and the rest of Europe free of Jews. Not by having them immigrate, not by leaving, but by murdering them. And so day after day, week after day, month after month, starting in the summer of 1941, the German army, with the help of some Hungarians and Slovak members of the armed forces, were murdering Jews. Day after day. 5,000 one day, 8,000 another way. It depends upon where they were and how many people were around in the town. They just marched them out and machine gunned them. And they were making progress towards getting rid of the Jews. They call it Judenrein. Europe must become Judenrein. Europe must become free of Jews. By the time 1941 is over, 500,000 Jews, men, women, and children, were murdered. By whom? By special units of the German army, Einsatzgruppen, with the help of the regular army and other people, and even the locals. March the Jews out into the forest, prepare ditches, machine gun them. 500,000 Jews were murdered in this fashion by the time 1941 was over. But the objective was to get rid of all the Jews of all of Europe, whether they were in Greece or Norway or Germany or France. All the Jews of Europe had to be gone. And the rate that they were killing Jews was too slow for them. And so they convened the conference on the 20th of January. At that conference were sitting some very bright people, members of the German army, high-ranking officers, chemists, doctors, physicists, and their job was to determine a best way to get rid of Jews very quickly. Because the rate at which they were doing it, 500,000 in 6 months, which means 1 million a year, would have taken them 10 years. 11 years maybe, because there were about 11 million Jews. And so this group of people on the 20th of January were assigned to come up with a much better method. And these people got together. It was a brain trust, really. And obviously they knew how to do that. How did they do it? Well, they sat together for an hour and a half, 2 hours. They were going to have a meeting. But before the 2 hours were over, an hour and a half was over, they came up with a solution. They will build death camps, bring the Jews from all over Europe to these death camps. They'll murder them there, burn their bodies, and nothing will be left of the Jews of Europe except ashes. And that was decided on the 20th of January of 1942. By the summer of 1942, 6 death camps were operational. Death camps basically consisted of gas chambers, where the Jews would be herded into these gas chambers, locked up there, pumped full of poison gas. The Jews would die, and then they would have ovens, crematory ovens, many of them, so they could process many people, burn their bodies, and all that's going to be left of the Jews of Europe will be ashes. In the summer of 1942, about 6 months after this decision was made, in my little city of about 2,000 Jews, in the middle of the night, there's a knock on every Jewish home. Of this 2,000 Jews, 1,800 picked up that night, marched into the synagogue. The synagogue was locked, and the Jews were kept there in a place which was normally occupied by about 400 people. So you can imagine what it was like to be inside this space with, by the way, no bathrooms and no running water. In the summertime, with no air conditioning. And there were the Jews of my town, 1,800 in a space of 400. Day and a half went by, the doors were opened up, under guard, the Jews were marched to the radio station and packed into cattle cars. Each one held 80, 90, 100 Jews. Kettles were locked. The train took off. Gone. Where? To Poland. And there the Jews arrived. They disappeared. Now, I didn't know exactly where they went because I was left at home with my parents and grandparents and my older brother, because we were so essential to running of the city. A month goes by. 2 months go by. 3 months go by. One morning, my grandfather and grandmother are arrested. We go into panic mode, as you can imagine. And we contact all kinds of people. In fact, through some smart people who had contacts with police, we managed to get my grandparents out of jail. Now, we're in trouble. We must do something. And so what do? We decide to leave. Because if we stay there, in Slovakia, in the city, we know eventually we'll be put into a train and disappear. And so we crossed the border into an adjacent country called Hungary. Well, Hungary also picked on the Jews, but not quite the same way. What they did is they took all the Jewish men between the ages of 18 and 60 and put them into a slave labor force and left their families at home. Because they figured if they leave the families at home, they won't have to feed them too much. The families will send them packages, and this way they won't have to feed them at all, or very little. And when they win the war, after they defeat the Soviet Union and eventually America and England, then they'll handle the Jews. They'll straighten them out. So the Jewish families in Hungary were at home. Not the Jewish families in Slovakia or Poland or Germany or France. No. Those Jews were all taken from their homes, shipped into Poland, where all the gas chamber and the death camps were, but not in Hungary. And so I am living in Hungary. In 1943, spring of 1944, things changed. 2 things happened. As you probably know, in 1944 spring, the American army has been fighting Germany with England and Russia, the Soviet Union, for almost 3 years by now, 2.5 years, making good progress. The America has taken over all of Italy by this time, pushing into Germany, bombing the cities of Germany, destroying their ability to make war. It will be over soon. Germany and Hungary and Italy and Slovakia will lose the war. America, England, Soviet Union will win the war. And I'm still living in Hungary in the spring of 1944. But in the spring of 1944, Hungary too decides to get rid of its Jews. And so on a spring day, 437,000 Jews were taken from their homes to a ghetto, to cattle cars, and shipped to death camps. My brother and I, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, 437,000 Jews in 53 days were taken from their home into cattle cars, shipped to Auschwitz, to a death camp. And so after 3 days being in a cattle car, the train stopped completely. The doors were open. I wanted to get out. I jump off the train. My brother behind me, my grandfather behind me, my grandmother, my aunt, my 10-year-old cousin. What I see, I look around. There are guards with submachine guns and dogs screaming, "Get out quickly! Take nothing with you! Form lines!" In the distance, I see flames coming out of chimneys. It was nighttime. The flames against the black sky. Very scary. Here I am, 14 years old, almost 15 years old. Where am I? What is this place? But I didn't have time to even think. Because suddenly I'm facing a man in uniform with a riding crop in his hand and simply points at left and right and separates people. Most of the people on my train, about 4,000 of them, are all marched in one direction. A few of us in the other direction. Maybe 300 or so in one direction and about 3,700 in the other direction. They're told they're going to take a shower, those 3,700. They march to 4 different buildings. They're told to go inside the building and undress because they're going to take a shower. They're given a bar of soap. And so they do as they're told because they were told they're going to take a shower. There's a big sign over the door, bathhouse. They go in, and lo and behold, they look up at the ceiling, and there are shower heads. And they're waiting for water to come out because, after all, they've been in the cattle cars for days. But no water comes out. The doors are locked, and poison gas through a bunch of holes in the ceiling is pumped into the place. Something referred to as Zyklon B. It's a cyanide-based gas, which kills. And so, of the 3,700 people that were separated from us, 24 hours later, are dead, their bodies burned. My grandfather and grandmother and aunt and 10-year-old cousin are ashes because they were Jews. That, my friends, was Auschwitz was. There are 6 of these facilities throughout Poland. Day after day, week after month, Jews are murdered. In Auschwitz itself, over 1.2 million people were brought there. Most of them murdered upon arrival. I was not murdered upon arrival. I was shipped off to work. I was given a tattoo on my arm to make sure I understand that I'm a prisoner, the property of the German government, and marched off eventually to work. My work consisted of draining swamps and plowing fields after they were drained. very hard work, on very little food, something which simulated coffee in the morning for breakfast, some soup at noon and some bread at night. Was always hungry, always tired. Now, the amount of food we got was around 300 or 400 calories. Scientifically determined that if you feed a body 300 to 400 calories, after 6 months, you use up all the reserve and eventually you die. But before you die, you can't work anymore because you're too weak. So not to feed the Jews for nothing, they had something called selections. Every so often we would come back from work at night, and rather than going to our building, to our barracks, get some bread, go to sleep, we marched to take a shower. Obviously, when you take a shower, you get undressed. So we would get undressed and march into the shower. The only problem was, on many, many occasions, there'd be a doctor look at you naked and determine if you should continue to live. If you look too tired, or you walked bent over, or you had boils, or you were too pale, the doctor would not speak to you. Simply look at the number on your arm, write it down on a pad, and next morning a truck would take you to the gas chamber. Life and death. Fortunately for me and my brother, we managed to work. When we managed to keep our strength up and work hard, and managed to survive the selections too in Auschwitz. 1945 came along, and by this January of 1945, the American army was already in Germany. The Russian army was approaching this place called Auschwitz. They were 50 miles away. And we hoped and prayed that suddenly the Nazi armies and all the guards will disappear and the Russian army will come upon us and feed us. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. On the 18th of January, of the 1.3 or so million people that were brought to Auschwitz in the last 2.5 years, 60,000 were still alive. And that morning, we marched on a death march. It's exactly what it says. You marched or you died, under guard. My brother and I tried to continue marching. I was tired, I was hungry, I was cold. My brother kept encouraging me, just keep marching, keep walking. Eventually, they're marching us someplace, otherwise they would shoot us. Say a prayer, he said, you'll feel better. And finally, we arrived in a new place, another camp in Germany called Buchenwald. Here, there was less food. That was the biggest problem there. All we got is a boiled potato, maybe every second day. Because originally this place was built for 5,000 people. Now you had about 60,000. So they limited the amount of food. You know what happens after a while? You become weak. You can no longer walk. You can't stand the information and be counted, and you die. And one day, my brother was taken away. I never saw him again. And I'm trying to survive. I'm 15.5 years old. My weight is going down because the food is so minimal. But I'm trying to hang on. It's already April of 1945. This is about a month before the war was over. And one morning, they start taking people on a death march. I keep hiding wherever I can. On the 10th of April, I'm hiding under a building in a crawl space, hoping and praying that I won't be found, but unfortunately on that day, one of the guards came with a dog, and the dog began to bark, and the guard screams out, to get out or I'll shoot you. So I crawl out with some of the other people, rush to the gate, and standing in front of the gate, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. The guards are on both sides, ready to march us out. And suddenly the siren goes off. And we look above our heads, and there are American planes at 10,000 feet, recoiling, running around the area, bombing the cities of Weimar and others, which is just about 4 or 5 miles away. Well, the guards didn't want to get killed, so they figured they'll wait. That air raid lasted all day long on that day, the 10th of April. The air raid over Weimar and the other cities close by lasted all day, and I survived another day. By the 11th of April, things were moving so fast. And as we looked around by noon or thereabouts, there were no guards anymore, inside the camp or outside the perimeter, in the guardhouses. Nothing. No troops. And then around 1 o'clock, it got very quiet. And 3 o'clock in the afternoon, on April 11th, 1945, 2 American soldiers walked into my barracks. I was free. All they wanted to do is feed us, because they walked in and saw in this particular barracks about 250 children, like me, 15, 16-year-olds, emaciated, weighing on the average 75, 80 pounds. They looked at us and they saw almost skeletons shuffling along. So their natural reaction was to feed us as much as possible, very quickly. It was too much, too fast. Eventually, I wound up in a hospital, and I got better. The war was over. They took all the kids from the particular barracks that I was in and gave us new clothing, rather than those gray and blue stripes. New food, all kinds of wonderful stuff, even chocolate bars. I gained weight. My hair began to grow. I began to feel better. By the 8th of May of 1945, World War II was over. In June, transportation became available. And so I decided the best thing to do is to try and go back to the town I was taken from. Hopefully, if I survived, possibly other members of my family did too. I had no idea whether anyone was alive or not. But I hoped and prayed that somebody, even though my brother was taken away, I hoped he was alive someplace and he'll come back to the same place. I hoped that my parents were alive someplace, because they were even in a different town than I was when I was taken away. They were in Budapest, in the capital. And so after many days of travel, by truck, by train, by walking, by crossing rivers, in ferries, finally arrived at the railroad station, about a mile out of town. Walked into the town, and the first person I saw was a farmer. I said to him, "Anybody in the Roth family survive? Did anybody come back?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Where?" I run over to the house, and there is my mother, sitting in the middle of the kitchen. I looked at her. I said, "Hi, Mom," like I'm back from playing ball or something. My mother looked up, and she practically fainted because she couldn't catch her breath. My parents survived, both of them. They survived in Budapest. What happened is that in Budapest, the Jews Two were being taken, put into trains and shipped out. If they didn't have trains, they marched them on a death march. In fact, by September, October of 1944, the Jews of Budapest were being shot on the street and dumped into the Danube. Before that was happening, my father got very ill. One day, he was in a coma. And so the ambulance came, doctors examined him and said, he's very contagious, he has typhus. We better isolate him someplace. Told my mother he's going to die soon. There's a night nurse, a Christian woman, who told my mother he doesn't necessarily have to die. I have seen miracles before. Maybe I can do everything to help him to try and survive. And this wonderful nurse, this angel, decided to try and save my father. And so every day would come to his bedside, make sure that IV is flowing, make sure oxygen is flowing, make sure he gets some nourishment, night after night. He was in a coma. After about 2 weeks, one night, she's doing all this, trying to talk him. In fact, she pinches him, and suddenly out come a word out of my father's mouth. How long have I been asleep, says my father. He came back out of a coma. But the Jews of Budapest were being shot on the street and dumped into the Danube. They needed a place to hide. This wonderful lady, this night, this Christian woman, took my parents into her one-bedroom apartment where she lived with her daughter, who was married, had a child. The son-in-law, of course, was not home because he was a young man. He was in the Hungarian Nazi army fighting the Russians. They get there. They fixed up a hiding place inside the apartment because they knew police would come and look for Jews. They didn't find them. She even got food for them because they were not there for 24 hours or 48 hours. They were there for weeks, for months. Hiding in this wonderful lady. She took a chance because if the Jews, my parents would have been found, she could have wound up in jail. And one night, there's a knock on the door. My parents immediately go into their hiding place. It's the husband, the son-in-law, comes home to his apartment for 3 days. And so the wife explained to the husband about these distant relatives who are hiding here. And you mustn't tell anybody. Because anybody finds out, they'll tell the police that Jews are hiding because they're going to get 5 pounds of sugar for free. This Hungarian soldier never betrayed my parents. My parents survived because somebody helped. Somebody was willing to help. They are the people who we need to look at and use as a role model. They saw people in trouble. What did they do? Didn't ignore it. They helped. They saved my parents' life. They're rescuers. They were the righteous of the world, who, even though the whole world was evil, all of Europe was involved. Millions of people were involved in the murder of Jews, of gathering the Jews and shipping them off. They said, this is insane. This is evil. I must do something. Yes, here comes an opportunity. They saved 2 very important people for me. I had parents. I was 16 years old in September of 1945, and I had parents. I did not have to fend for myself. Unfortunately, our neighbors and friends didn't suddenly become nice people. They continued the hatred. The comment was, so many Jews came back. What happened? We thought that Hitler and Germany took care of them once and for all. They promised us no Jews in Europe. Some of them came back. There was no place for Jews even after the war. And so the Jews had to leave. We managed to come to America. Most Jews could not come because America had a very limited spaces that Jews would be, people were allowed to come after the war, particularly Jews. And so they stayed in displaced persons camps where they were. It was not until 1948 when the United Nations decided to partition the place called Palestine, part of it to the Jews, a small part for the Jews, and the largest part was Jordan, still a country, and half of Palestine was given to the Arabs. You live here, you create a country, you create a people, and here is the other half for the Jews. And so finally, after 2,000 years of persecution, hatred, and murder of Jews, the most immediate murder of 6 million Jews, now the Jewish people have a home. But unfortunately, that too didn't go too well. Why? Because 5 Arab armies attacked this new state called Israel. Luckily, very luckily, they managed to survive and build a country, build a people. But unfortunately, there are still people in this world who don't want the Jewish state to exist. They decided they don't belong there. Even though Jews, as you well know, lived there 2,000 years ago, for about 1,500 years before the Common Era. It was not under the year 70 of the Common Era that Rome destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and chased out the Jews to become slaves. And Jews wanted to come back all those years. And finally, after 2,000 years. But unfortunately, the hatred of the Jew, anti-Semitism, still exists. Anti-Semitism, terrorism, wars. There are states like Iran and others want to destroy the Jewish people. They're trying to build atomic bombs to destroy the Jewish people in Israel or any place else. They have even convinced people in Europe of anti-Semitism and hatred against the Jewish state. Even in our college system today, in the United States, there are organizations which promote hatred against the Jewish people in their own colleges. In some colleges, Jewish young men will not wear a head covering because that recognizes him as a Jew. He's liable to be beaten up or certainly harassed. There are even some professors who preach hatred against the Jewish people today in the United States. That, my friends, is where the Jewish people need your help. You too will be going to college. You will hear those words. Kill the Jews. They're evil. There's an apartheid state that the Jews have. No, it's a democracy. The only real democracy in the whole of Middle East. Yet they call them evil. And so today I ask you to understand what has happened to the Jewish people. Not just over the 2,000 centuries, but today. And fight those forces that are evil, that tell lies, and try to destroy the Jewish people again. What Hitler did not finish, they would like to. And so I ask you, understand what's been happening to the Jewish people. Join with CUFI. It is the largest organization in the world, probably, supporting the Jewish people. 8 million Christians in America have joined together and said this is evil. The evil of hatred must stop. So I ask you, join together with CUFI. Find out what this is all about and make sure the Jewish people continue to exist. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Absolutely unbelievable. Irving, you amaze and astound us every time you present. So thank you so much, sir, for this.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So just to remind all of you, by the way, my name is Cherith Runyon. I'm the Midwest coordinator for CUFI on campus. And we are opening up the floor for questions now. So if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A box down below at the bottom of your screen. And we'll start. There's a student who's asking, also, he says, thank you so much for being here. And he says, what and when led you to decide to first share your story and history with people? What motivated you to share your story?
Well, the reason for it is that I want to make sure that my great-grandchildren, that I have 6 of right now, and maybe more coming soon, I hope, can live in a country and in a world that is peaceful. And by understanding what has happened, that it all began with words, and from there, slogans and action and murder, that happened because intelligent people, educated people, became evil. They were transformed. There are today people who are pushed the same propaganda. We must stop them. And so I speak to hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people throughout the United States and even beyond the United States. Understand what happens when hatred and lies becomes the order of the day. It's possible to transform people, ordinary, law-abiding, God-fearing, church-going people, to become murderers. I want to make sure it doesn't happen. Because I don't want my children and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren to be looked upon as evil and be harassed, persecuted, yes, and murdered. And anybody for that matter, any group of people, as we're going through a very difficult time right now. It's wrong that we have prejudice and hatred and racism. It's all wrong. I know about it because I've been persecuted, threatening with murder. We must stop that. All life matters. Black life, white life, green, purple, or any other color. We all are human beings. We all matter.
Absolutely. Very, very truthful. Another question is, do you see any parallels between what's potentially going on today in our society and what you saw during the time of the Holocaust and leading up to it? Do you see any parallels there?
I certainly do, because there are people who are marching, some good ones marching for equality, and I applaud that. But there were also events that took place. In Pittsburgh, on a Saturday morning, as a service taking place, anti-Semites, Jew haters walked into the synagogue and murdered 10 people because they were Jews. This must not happen. Any place. It's in the Middle East, or it is in California, or any other place. This must not take place. We must not allow this to happen. There are countries where hatred is in the textbooks. Hating and destroying other people is in the textbooks. for children when they're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. This must not happen. And unfortunately, the UN supports those schools, and they do nothing about it. We must do something about it. Because if one person is threatened in this world because of his race or religion or ethnicity, all of us are in danger.
Absolutely, very true. And thank you to Derek and Nivi for submitting your questions. Another student, Bridget, is saying thank you so much for speaking, but often, you know, we see BDS messages on campus, and I know you're very familiar with BDS. What are the easiest ways to counter BDS, the BDS message, and support Israel, especially for campus students who are in college or will be going to college?
I think you have to know the facts, because what BDS is saying are 99.9% pure, unadulterated fiction. They made it up. I mean, that's all it is. It's all made up stuff. Right now, the world is going through an epidemic, or pandemic, we call it. 20% of the people of Great Britain believe that it was brought about, the pandemic, the coronavirus, was brought about in some way by Jews. Now, can you imagine something as idiotic? It is the most bizarre thing. Yet they're saying it, and they believe it. So we need to stop these lies. You need to know the facts and confront people by facts. Now, there's some people who don't care about the facts, who are just haters. Well, some of those you can't speak to. But what's important is those people who are open-minded, who come into the college system, or even the high school system for that, with no particular understanding of the issues involved. What I want you to know is understand the history and be able to differentiate fact from fiction. It's critical that you understand the difference and be able to confront with facts. The most important thing in the first step. That is why I suggest that every student possible who is interested, get a copy of the brochure from CUFI called Israel 101. And you'll get the straight story, the straight poop, the straight story. This is what is true. This is what is fact. It's important. It's the first step. And then confront. Because most people don't know much. Most people don't care. So tell them about it. Do care. Because your neighbor.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah. And for those of you who are not familiar with what BDS stands for, it stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. And it's a very anti-Semitic, anti-Israel movement right now. So we have many resources to explain that at another time. But thank you so much for submitting your questions. We have two more. And one is from Kennedy. And this is actually saying, thank you so much. It's a privilege to hear you speak. So again, thank you for being on with us. And a last question is from Janera, and she is saying also that she grew up hearing about the Holocaust, but hearing you speak about it makes it very real. But she wants to know, where about in Hungary did you live, and what was that area kind of like at that time? Because she also had a grandfather who lived in Hungary.
Well, what happened in Hungary, already in 1920, Hungary began persecuting Jews. In 1920, right after World War I, Hungary passed a law limiting the number of Jews that are allowed to go to university to 2%. So once 2% of the student population at the university was Jewish, no more Jews would be allowed. It didn't matter if you're a genius or anything else. And over the years, more and more restrictions against Jews during that whole period of time. At the same time, they were really the last ones who are shipped the Jews out. And as I say, there were some people in Hungary, like the wonderful lady who helped my parents survive. There were some who did that. Other places too. And if you go to Jerusalem today, you will find an area which is called Yad Vashem, which is an area of education and museums and libraries, also places to walk. Along the walkways, on each side of the walkway, there are trees dedicated to those who stood up and said, no, this is wrong. I will try and save a Jew. There are 27,000 people who are honored this way, with their names on each tree, to show life is possible, and together, if you live, we can grow. So life was very difficult. The Jews were persecuted in Hungary. Unfortunately, today, Hungary is not the finest of places for Jews either. It looks like some of the hatred of the Jew is coming back. I hope it doesn't go much further.
Yeah, well, we all agree. We hope it stays with us. And here being with CUFI on campus, this is the first step. So all of you are joining and not being a bystander with this. So thank you. We do have one more question, Irving, excuse me.
Yes.
And the first is, how can we share your story, especially being college students or high school students? And did you write a book?
Well, thank you for the question. Yes, I wrote a book. It's called Bundy's Brother, and that's who I am. My brother's name was Aaron, was actually Andrew, but the nickname for Andrew in Hungary is Bundy, and that's why I call the book. It's dedicated to him and to the 1.5 million children that were murdered during that period of time by the people who were involved in murdering Jews. And if you want a copy of the book, I think the best way to do it is go to your teacher, who can contact CUFI, and the book is $15. Just tell your teacher you want a book, give him or her $15. She'll collect the money, give it to CUFI, and within a matter of a week or so, you will receive a copy of the book. And if you give me your name, CUFI will give me the names. I will then sign each book, and you'll get it in the mail, or you'll get it directly from CUFI or through your school.
Fantastic. And how can we further share your story?
Well, remember I spoke to you, and one of the things I would like you all to do is tell this, remember that I spoke to you. I will not be able to speak probably to your grandchildren at all, because I won't be around. But I would like your grandchildren, your children and grandchildren to know about the Holocaust, about my life. But I would like you to become surrogate survivors. Make sure you tell the story. Repeat it to your friends, eventually to your children and grandchildren. Have a copy of the book. Put it on a shelf. Read it. And maybe, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could hand this book to your daughter or son in 15, 20 years from now? Wouldn't that be terrific?
That would
Thank
be
you.
absolutely terrific. Oh my goodness. Yes, if anyone is interested in a book, let your teacher or whomever is helping you host this, let them know, and we can definitely get that to you. One last thing before we close, I want to remind you all, we have the June 28th through the 30th, as you can see behind me, we are having our virtual CUFI Summit. You're going to learn all about Israel and how to advocate for the truth about Israel on your campuses, and much, much more. You're going to be able to hear Irving and many more people like that. So it's a fantastic event. On this webinar, everyone on this webinar will be sent an invite, so be on the lookout for that. And with that, we will close. Thank you so much. Remember the...
Can I just make one more quick comment?
Absolutely.
In October, CUFI is going to put a movie together. They're working on it, called the Never Again. And you'll hear about it hopefully through the media and so on. It should be coming out. It's the life story of two people. Me, an old person, and a very young person. And you'll hear about it. It's called Never Again. And I hope you get to see the material as it comes along. We'll also be speaking about it at the summit. So be ready for an interesting movie. I hope you like it. And let me know how you like it.
Absolutely. Very good reminder. Yes, CUFI is hosting and premiering the movie called Never Again, talking about the history of anti-Semitism and how we can combat it. Fantastic film. We're looking forward to it in October. If you want more info on that, I believe you go to neveragainthemovie.org. Neveragainthemovie.org. Fantastic event coming up. So look into that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Remember our summit, June 28th to the 30th. You'll be getting an invite, so stay on the lookout for that. And thank you so much, Jessica and Irving, for being a part of this webinar. And
Have a good day.
awesome. Well, have an amazing day, everyone, and we will see you later.